of the Joint European Digital Girls of the Year. I want to talk today about using social media and technology around the areas of education, because social media can be great for relationships, like building relationships with people far away, but it's one that most people think is negative, because when you think of social media, sometimes you think of cyberbullying and getting hacked and people sharing photos of you that you didn't want them to share and all that. But you can use social media like for Skype and FaceTime, which is what I use to connect with my uncle over in Japan, because he's married and living there, and he has 2 boys, and we can't see them that often. They've been over 3 times, and I was very lucky to go and visit them in April. But when you divide 4 times by 11, almost 12 years, that's not a lot of time. Sometimes they send photos and letters, but that's not as good as being there. But like, we use Skype sometimes because we can see and they can tell us all about the pictures they drew at school, and it was great because we even got to see the first steps of our cousin. And of course you can use social media to connect with like friends that you have like met when you were younger but you don't really see them now, or like if they're in a different country, you can message them like whenever you're away, and you can tell them about what you're doing, and if you're on your holidays, how your holidays are getting on and all that.
Very good. And I will say, Evian has a particular message she wants to land, but before she kicks into that, I think it's worth really recognising this young lady, because she's already a global ambassador for coding for STEM, particularly for girls in STEM, and has run workshops in MozFest in London, has had 4 websites to date, winning awards like People of the Year and Pride of Ireland. So for a young person, already very accomplished. So why don't you give us your thoughts on the subject today?
Basically, my thoughts are, like, don't be afraid of technology, just be afraid of not knowing how to use it, because sometimes if you don't know how to use like certain parts of technology and you're trying to learn them, you could end up like doing something wrong. Like you could end up, someone could start following you on something, like someone who ends up bullying you or something, so don't follow people you don't know on social media at all, because they could be bullies or bad people.
Very good. And did you want to go through anything else?
And also we go to school in different places, and some people, like the school I go to, well, the primary school I went to, we use technology a lot, and we did like projects on Scratch, and we got to do lots of projects like that for homework. And when you use technology for homework and all that, even your parents will probably start checking your homework a lot more to see if you've got anything interesting that they can help you with, or interesting stuff that they could try do as well. And in some ways with technology, it's probably even nicer to be a teacher as well, because you get to think of all the great stuff you can do with all that technology, and all the teaching bits you can do for teaching them how to use like Scratch and how to use Minecraft, like different versions of it, for building castles or building bits of history like the Colosseum and all that.
Excellent. Right, thank you for that. So we'll hear more from Evelyn a little bit later, but now I just want to introduce Monique. Monique Morrow is a humanitarian technology pioneer and a very influential woman in technology worldwide. First time I've met you, but I had known the name before. She's the president and co-founder of the Humanized Internet, a non-profit organisation headquartered in Switzerland, which focuses on providing digital identity to some of the most underprivileged in society. So would you like to give us your thoughts?
Sure. First of all, I'm very thrilled to be on the stage with Avian. So just an inspiration for me personally. And I want to pick up on a little bit of what you've stated about the positive use of technology. However, I'm also very focused, as has been said in the introduction, on not only digital identity sets, but what does your footprint look like and whether or not you are in control of that. So that's one issue that becomes very, very interesting, especially as users of social media. As a technologist, I love technology. I cannot say more than enough about that. I love it, and I love the possibilities. I've come as a Luddite with my notes, and I wanted to kind of frame it up as we go through our conversation with a few facts. It's no surprise that Steve Jobs and Bill Gates have actually had controlled, and still do, the use of technology in terms of what their children are how they use it. That's number one. And the thing of it is that we are tethered. We're tethered to these devices. And we need to look at, not because it's technology, but it's because of how we use it. We were talking about when you're at home, right? And, you know, you have a conversation at the dinner table and what you're doing with that technology. So there may be an overuse of phones or mobile phones, but usually the complaints have come from kids that their parents are too much on the phone at dinner time. And so that's one observation, that there's not enough quality time that's spent, as a fact. 82% of kids that have been polled basically believe that the time at dinner should be device-free. The other thing is that, as we go through some facts here to spur a little bit of our conversation, is Leonid Miyakoko from NYU basically had an impact study of mobile phones on the human race and on us as humans, and basically confirmed what you stated. That's great for education, great for access to the market, etc. But there are some concerns around your health and insomnia. And one thing that I think is very interesting is that we check our phones 150 times per day. Let me halt. We check our phones 150 times per day. So perhaps, and by the way, young people tweet 110 times per day. And what we have now is a psychiatrist who basically said, Nancy Collier, who wrote a book called Power Off, that basically says we are spending far too much time on unnecessary topics, right? So it's this polarity that we're dealing with. And as we go now to, further into the conversation, we have to look at how it's not technology, but how we as humans start to harness that technology.
Okay, so it's interesting. I have a 24-year-old, a 20-year-old, and a 15-year-old, and we would have set a rule from the very beginning with the kids that we would sit together at dinner and there would be no devices. So we wouldn't sit in front of the TV and there would be no devices. And both of my boys, my daughter now, she's 15, she's just coming through it, but both my boys at one point or other would have said, why can't we sit in front of the TV? Why can't I have my phone? All my friends are doing that. This doesn't seem to make any sense. And within a year or two, they both individually would have come back in their mid-teens and said, actually, I'm really glad we do this, because it is a way to connect as a family. I also think that it's important because it teaches us how to be present. If we don't have an event like that on a daily basis where we're able to put it down and actually engage consciously, we don't learn to be present in our own lives, let alone with anybody else.
It's to the point. I mean, just one piece of data, if I may, before we go to John, is that the University of Maryland actually had a project called the World Unplugged Project. And fundamentally, they had dealt with students in 10 countries. And what they found is that the students expressed distress when they were disconnected for 24 hours. So, it's to your point, have a conversation at the table, check out your devices. We'll talk about that more moving forward.
So I'll introduce our next guest, John Hartnett. John John's a very interesting background. He'll tell it better than I do, but he's 25 years in C-suite and 20 years, I think, in California.
Yeah.
And what's interesting about what John will have to say is John is one of the people who's been at the heart of actually creating some of the technologies that have led us to where we are. So do you want to introduce yourself, John?
Yeah, thanks, Tim. As you mentioned, when I left Ireland 20 years ago, Facebook didn't exist, Snapchat didn't exist, WhatsApp didn't exist, a smartphone didn't exist. And it was a very different world. And I've lived in Silicon Valley for 20 years. I'm a dad. I've got 3 teenagers. I've got a little girl, almost 12, another daughter, 14, and a son who's 16. So I'm living the life in the real world of teenagers and social media and being connected. From my career perspective, that has been my career. I was in a company called Palm. We invented the smartphone almost 15, nearly 20 years ago. And it was a very exciting journey being part of something like that, because when we invented a smartphone, we wanted to enrich people's lives. We wanted to unleash people's ability to be able to find information, take them away from the desk, make them more mobile, etc. So it was all very positively, orientated. And obviously in the world that we live in today, I believe technology and the access to the web is mostly a very, very positive thing. And it does really, really good for the community, for families, for the world. I'm involved today in investing in technology companies that are in the food supply chain and agriculture and helping farmers produce more with less. So there's many really positive things from a technology perspective. But I don't think we take it seriously. And I think it's time, to stand back and see what's around us. And, as a dad, as a technology leader, in the industry, education to me is probably the most important thing. With parents first. When I grew up, all this didn't exist. And many parents today, much younger than me, are dealing with things that they haven't grown up with. And I think we need to be able to help, parents and educate them in terms of parental controls, security issues in terms of social media and how you can protect, your children. And I really look at it from a school perspective as well. Sex education was taboo 20 years ago. Now it's very much part of being proactive in educating our children. We need to be doing the same thing from a technology perspective. Likewise with the Catholic Church. I think that the power of social media and technology has a big bearing on our values and how we communicate. And I think the Catholic Church can take a lead role in helping communities and helping families be more educated and prepared, for this. So maybe I'll stop there.
No, it's really interesting. I mean, I want to come back to ask you a question about how this impacts in your age group in a minute. But just before we do, if we take what you were saying about the intent with the creation of technology is to enrich people's lives, and having worked for over 16 years in Microsoft, I know the language, and people are very genuine. The engineers are very genuine. But the interesting thing is that we've reached a point with some of the technology that was intended to give us more time, right? To take away wasted time and give us more time in our lives. That actually for some people, that time is now being used unproductively by the technology. So it's a double-edged sword. Yeah. Thoughts on that?
It's definitely a double-edged sword. I think that, Monique's, point in terms of the amount of times we touch our phones, our smartphones, kids, adults, we're spending 7 to 10 hours a day at screens. By the way, there's a great movie for parents called Screenagers. And I would really encourage people to take a look at that if you want to check it out online. It's a fantastic educational program around this. But I think that the educational part and understanding the power of what you have is so important. And you mentioned some really important things earlier in terms of the dinner table. At our home in Silicon Valley, I mean, we're surrounded. It's like you know, the mecca of technology. So you need to get a break from this. So we religiously make sure that our kids don't have their phones at the table. We have rules in the home, you know, no technology in the bedroom. You know, my daughters are on social media, they love it, they communicate with their friends. But, you know, you think you're in your own room, but you're really, everybody in the world is looking at you. And you need to educate, you know, the kids to be aware of that. So these family rules and traditions, I think, are important to start early, you know, at the home to control this.
So you're dying to get in there, Monique.
Which is one observation coming also from private industry. I used to work as one of Cisco's CTOs. One of the things that we've noticed is that with technology, it keeps you always on. And I think this is the problem we have. Whatever's happening in each part of the world, and so people have constantly felt that they have to be on. And so that's created this on problem. On the other hand, enterprises are fundamentally saying Fridays are no mail days, or, you know, they're actually starting to dictate that you turn yourself off because, you know, because it's becoming so stressful at the family, from the family home and family environment per se. So it's now we as technologists creating this for the reason that you said it should keep us all free, and we are doing great work with it. Now it's also being able to harness it where you don't have this always being tethered. Because we actually asked a question of some of our colleagues, if there were an emergency wherever you are, what is the device that you would be taking with you? What is the one thing that you would take? And everybody basically said it's that phone, right? They cannot live without it, or they feel that it is an extension. And one last thing I will say, on a legal perspective, this is really interesting that people are starting to look at law, that some interpretation is that the smartphone, because of what you put on it, is an extension of you. And so now it looks at how would that be perceived, you know, in terms of if it's an extension of you, depending on jurisdiction, what would that mean in the court of law?
So everyone, we had three old people talk about what we think of young people. So let's come to you, shall we? So it's interesting, when we spoke earlier and you were talking about the lack of broadband in the area where you live, I got the sense that one of the things that make you different to some of the kids your age who've grown up in the city, you really appreciate what the access means to you and you don't take it for granted. What do you think the difference would be for someone like yourself versus someone in the city who's had it since they were 4 in their hand?
Well, back at home we have our devices, but we have basically no broadband. So everything on them, if me and my brothers have games, they have to be offline ones that work with no internet. And the only thing I can do to connect with my friends is I'm able to text them, but whenever I get the internet, like we go to Tesco or Dublin or wherever we're going, I'm able to Snapchat them, like send them photos of what I'm doing. Like if we were asked on our holidays, how's your holidays going? You up to anything today? When I was over in France, I sent a lot to my friends photos of what I was doing, like photos of the zoo, of all the animals, and photos of going swimming or something. But whereas if you've had it for a long time, like devices, you probably would be like sending people stuff every day, like being on it for ages, doing all these games. But like in my house, my brothers and I, we normally have something we call screen time. It's where we get half an hour weekdays or an hour at the weekends of device time. And it's also good for getting my brothers to behave, because anytime they're bold, they get 5 to 10 minutes taken off it. And if they're really bold, they get it taken off them entirely, and they're not allowed it till the next week, the next month, the next day, basically, yeah.
We have a solution there. We have a solution.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. So one of the things, so I'll just take a minute, just a little bit on my background. So I I started coding at 12, which is quite a long time ago. And I fell in love with the technology for the same reasons that you were saying, that it was the possibilities that it gave us, right? And I've pursued it through most of my career. I've done some different things, but largely it's had a tech backbone. And one of the things I'm very interested in is just the impact of technology on our psychology and even on our neurology. And you know, that drive for instant gratification. You know, I in the early part of my career, I worked in the tobacco business, and one of the things that's interesting about nicotine versus, say, a coffee, where coffee actually has a similar impact on your brain chemistry to nicotine. But the difference is, when you drink a coffee, it takes about 15 minutes, between 8 and 15 minutes, for it to have an impact on your brain. So we know when we have a coffee, it wakes us up, but it takes a while. Whereas if you have a cigarette, it hits you in 8 seconds. So the connection between the act and the impact is very short.
Yes.
And that's one of the reasons it's more difficult to quit, because the brain realizes there's a reward mechanism. I think technology, there's a reward mechanism, there's an instancy. I remember reading an article more than 10 years ago, and the article introduced a concept called bleepilepsy, where when a device would go bleep, we would react, right? And there is that sense of the immediate kind of reward in the brain, right? What are your thoughts on that?
So, well, one thing is, you know, there's the counter response is that computers shut themselves down. They reboot. And if you're constantly on, it does have a neurological effect on you in terms of stress, etc. You basically have to actually harness it. I mean, the concept of having a shock. And by the way, I love your app, so I think we really get a sense of direction there. Is really important. The fact is we are tethered, but we have the notion of some level of discipline that we have to think about. We haven't even talked about what's happening in technology yet. People are talking about portable MRIs, which is great, but they're also talking about telepathy, which is brain-to-brain communications. Then you get into another modality of I can read your thoughts. And so lots of things are happening, and it's happening very fast with the technology. And on one hand, we have tools and the wonders of looking at how we harness those tools. I mean, I've been looking at refugees and people who are stateless, and of course, that's very, very important for them, is to have at least a tool with which they can communicate, and most people do have a phone, which is really important. It's just the sense of our responsibility. When you have a pack of cigarettes that says it could cause cancer, here we have different sets of modalities that we have to be very cognizant about, and it's called responsible use. And what you and I were talking about is doing social good, which is what you're doing.
Mm-hmm. John?
Yeah, I mean, instant gratification is a big part of the internet today. I mean, people take photos and instantly up on Facebook, and they're, you know, how many people have followed it, liked it, etc. And there's a positive reaction, you know, by each individual, you know, when to do that. It's tough on young kids, teenage kids, and, you know, with young girls, they want to look their best, or boys want to be the best guys at sport or whatever, and they're taking the best photo, and it's kind of creating an artificial image. We want to look, you're obviously younger than me, but, you know, younger and fitter and better. So it's kind of putting this bar up there for people to kind of create this almost like false image of themselves. And I think there's dangers, you know, with that, as well as the whole kind of instant gratification. I would say, Tim, and I'm very much like yourself, I've grown up through technology. I love technology. I've probably 57 devices in my home. I couldn't live without technology. I live on the other side of the planet in California, and on a personal perspective, it's made a big impact to be able to communicate with my family here. I can talk with my sisters here, you know, and see them, you know, rather than having to travel 10 or 11 hours to come back here. You know, last year, my sister had a very significant stroke, and she was, you know, in a very near-death situation. But as a family, it connected us, and we were able to communicate with each other. And I knew my sister was getting better. You know, so there are very good positives.
It can be hugely enriching. I mean, it's a way for us to stay connected. If it's used properly, it can genuinely allow us to be connected. The challenge, though, is some of the connections, as you talked about some of the younger people, and I want to come back to Avian now. So some of the younger people, if they haven't, it's very important to maintain a sense of self in this. I think that's so important to teach our children. Maintain your sense of self, and then from that you can engage meaningfully with the rest of the world, right? But one of the challenges is that while it does allow us to connect so powerfully, and in personal situations like that, it means so much to us. It can also actually make some of the connections artificial. So, Evian, from your perspective, are you seeing people in your kind of age group that you would be mixing with? Do you see people moving into the social media, and do you feel it creates genuine connections, or are you seeing any artificial connections between people?
Well, a lot of my friends, we like connect over social media, but some people they connect with random people and they talk to them, but they never know who they are. And some people they could set up fake accounts and all that, where they would make people think that they are someone else, but they're not, which is very dangerous. Which is why most parents only allow kids to follow their friends and make sure they're the only people they're talking to. And that's probably the most important thing about technology, that you make sure you're safe when you're going online, and that you're not that no one dodgy or someone is looking at what you're doing, and basically just keep all your stuff private. So only people that you are following can see it, because if they're not private, strangers might see what you're doing and all that, which is very dangerous.
Yep.
Yeah, that's true. Very good points.
Very true.
An area we probably haven't chatted about, and it's another big challenge for families and parents, is gaming.
Yes.
My son is a gamer and he loves it. We have to control it really, really well. I mean, it's...
And how old is he, John?
He's 16.
16.
And, I think that on the positive side, gaming introduces kids to computing and makes it comfortable and fun, etc. And we've also got to, understand that gaming is probably the fastest growing part of technology today. Gaming will probably be in the Olympics in the next, 4 to 8 years. So it's a big industry. It's a big business. It's a big thing, and it's happening. There are scholarships in universities now in the United States allowing kids in on scholarships for gaming. So it's a real thing and not going away. But at the same time, it is the epitome of addiction, for young kids. And again, the controls, the rules, parents need solutions. I think parents are struggling today.
Yes.
They need solutions. They need help to be able to manage this. I've seen many, good things, but negative things with this, because obviously, as you know, with a lot of gaming, it's Wi-Fi.
Yep.
You're playing with a team. My son's we live in Silicon Valley. He plays with guys in Seattle, in Canada, in New York. So it's a real world, game. And there are people that are out there in this world that are stalking the gaming world as well. So these are real tough issues for families, for the church, for government, and for schools that I think we need to get on the front foot of, because I think we're always following technology, and I think we need to kind of step forward and how we can kind of enable and help. And I really feel it's at the parent, level to help them.
But, there you're talking, so I think, first of all, we all love technology. There's no given.
Yeah.
We all grew up with it. But there you're talking about addiction. And esports is big, by the way, when we get into the esports situation. And as families, parents are very concerned about how much on-time kids have, and what worlds that they're starting to live in. You have 200 moves a minute, by the way, on these sports, and they do create the Olympics. Their Olympic stadiums are full with competitors, and these are heroes at typically very young ages. But the situation is now what we're seeing is that there are parents coming in with their kids saying, my kid is addicted, and my child is addicted. And the child going through now off time from the game, off time from that world, because he or she had been so involved in it and lost their own sets of realities, or as parents, family time together, and realized that it was taking away from just the family. So it's a really important issue that you brought out. Very, very important.
And it starts very young. It starts at 3 and 4 years of age. I'm sad to hear some of the stats in terms of, like, there are 4-year-olds that have 7% of 4-year-olds have smartphones, 70 to 75% are using iPads, etc. And again, in an environment, in a family, when the mother is running around doing lots of things, and child is screaming, your impulse is to give them something, to keep them quiet. And at the moment, it's giving them a smartphone or giving them an iPad, and it's really it's starting at that level. And I think that's an area where we gotta, kind of sit up and say, what else could we be giving them and controlling and managing, I think.
Gaming is an interesting area. There are some studies which would say that people who game, and Aristotle said everything in moderation, right?
Yeah.
That it can improve decision-making skills, for example.
Yes.
But it can be taken too far. And I think it brings us into another area, because I think if you develop, as you say, if you start too young and you develop an addictive capability, if you train yourself to look for that instant gratification, it can go into other parts of your life. So it can lead into substance abuse, or a current issue is online gambling.
Yes.
Online gambling is giving that instant gaming capability. I can bet on something 22 minutes into a game on what's going to happen in the 25th minute, and then I can go. And I've done some work with addiction charities, and it is a very fast-growing area of difficulty for us, because it's in the hand. And there's some studies recently I saw where they said the average 25-year-old who engages in online gambling, so it's not every 25-year-old, but those who engage with it have 5 accounts.
Yeah. And, I think education, and I don't think we're taking it seriously enough. Like in the US, a kid has to be 21 by the time they can drink, but yet at 4 years of age, they've got one of the most powerful, dangerous tools, very positive tools, but dangerous tools in their hands. And I think that, from a government perspective, I think there's regulation that needs to come in place in terms of the ages, the controls, etc., and also government to push back on big corporations to help, put some controls around how kids are dealing with this. I think at the parent level I'd mentioned, I think at the school level, it's just so important to not just. I'm thrilled that technology has come into the school, and it's a very positive thing. And I'm very much behind, helping young kids get introduced to coding and technology. Coder Dojo is a phenomenal success from Ireland, etc. But at the same time, we need to be able to educate on some of the areas that there are risks and challenges and addiction issues as well. So I think we need to be able to help, teachers, here as well.
So if I go back to you, Irving, so if we think about, you've engaged in the technology space early, and one of the things I think all of us would want is to make sure you stay engaged in technology, because one thing we see, particularly with girls actually, is they'll engage with the technology young and then they fall off in their mid-teens. Is there anything you'd like to see the technology industry or government or anybody doing to help people like yourself stay engaged and be supported in growing a career in technology?
Well, like some girls that I know, they've started making all these new games and inventing apps and websites, and it would be great if the government allowed maybe a group of girls each year to come and make this one big app together, or make this game or project together that could help change people's lives, maybe making an app for deaf or blind people, to help them, or apps to help help people who are learning to speak, babies and toddlers, help them understand what people are saying to them. and all that. That would help people maybe stay in technology, like girls stay doing technology more, because then they could help more people, and then they'd feel really good after doing it, which would be great.
Yeah.
It's interesting, isn't it, how you hear what we were saying in the early part of our falling in love with technology. It's all about the passion for the possibility.
Yes. It is, and one of the wonderful apps that are coming out, just from wonderful leaders as yourself, is an anti-bully app, and they've been created by girls to say, look, if you feel that you're being bullying, you know, you can, there's one that's like, sit at my table, you can sit at my table, and so on. So they've actually have these anti-bullying apps. So that's an example created by leaders as yourself. And because people realize that, you know, with the technology, there is a misuse. And that's a nice way of where people at all age groups, because technology is you know, has no agency, is involved. And the other thing I wanted to say about technology is, let's take another positive example. People who suffer from dementia. You know, if you use augmented reality as an example, they come back to a world that is so, whether it's music or hearing the waves of the sea, that just awakens them, and they go back in memories that you never knew that they had, that they were so lost. So that's a positive uses of the technologies that we see.
We, you know, again, on the positive side, you know, I founded the Irish Technology Leadership Group, which is a group of Irish and Irish American leaders that want to give back. It's a not-for-profit. And one of our key focus areas is around encouraging young kids to go into a career of innovation and technology and entrepreneurship. And in partnership with the Irish government, we set up the Young Innovator Awards that we do at Shannon Airport. And we have thousands of kids in Shannon Airport. We shut down part of the airport for a year. The kids are on stage like this after creating their tool or app or invention, and they're getting the opportunity to be able to present and build their skills in communication. And then we bring the winning team over to Silicon Valley, and we give them a scholarship in Silicon Valley and bring them to Facebook and Google and all these great companies, and experience life, you know, there as well. And I think, again, it's, you know, exposing kids to technology early, I think, is important, you know, as part of the journey. And again, I'll congratulate Coder Dojo here in Ireland. I'm living in Silicon Valley, and I'm very proud of what Ireland has contributed to the world in many ways, and I think Coder Dojo is probably one of the best things.
It's tremendous.
That has been put together by, you know, a young 17-year-old originally, you know, so.
What's the age group for that awards?
The age group is, you're almost in the...
I was just wondering, I think it might be the only award she hasn't won yet, that's why I'm asking.
It's between 12 and 16. That's the age.
So we have to get you ready now. That's the next time we get you in, you'll have won that award, right? That's excellent. So you mentioned the bullying thing. I think there's it's an interesting area, again, from papers I would have read a long time ago. It's interesting how our brains work when it comes to whether we're physically present with another person or remote from them. So for example, you'll make one decision if the person is sitting with you, but you'll make the same decision with less empathy if they are remote. And that is just the hardwiring of our brains. It's just the neurology. And technology, the more we use technology, the more it creates a distance. We have to almost rewrite the software in our brains, I guess, by behaviors to maintain our empathy with people who are far away. And you can see this in, for example, even if you're receiving service, if you've got people and it's a call center and you never get to see your customer, or as a customer you never get to see a representative, you'll get one kind of service. Whereas if somebody maintains a branch, you know, if they've stores or whatever, and they're able to connect with their customer, it's a different kind of engagement. Now, there are some suggestions that that's one of the reasons cyberbullying is an issue, is that kids will do something when they're remote from another person.
It's true.
Where they would not do that if they were in front of someone. They will call them a name or say something that they wouldn't say in front of them.
So you have a person whom I had the pleasure to meet, Dr. Mary Aiken, and Dr. Mary Aiken is a cyber psychologist out of Dublin, and the whole new industry, the whole new study of cyber psychology is something that she's been developing. And one of the points that Dr. Aiken has said is that if you don't address cyberbullying, for the very reason that you said, it's an extension, you depersonalize the individual, that individual can become a cyber stalker, and then it gets worse, and then it gets worse, because you're living in this constant underworld of depersonalization through technology that you have to address. And so there's the whole issue here is to be able to recognize that fact. And I think going back to the apps that have been created, because girls are typically the victims of cyberbullying, and the girls have come out with the examples of the apps that we have seen. Because if you don't address the cyberbullying part, sadly, it turns into suicide. And so we have to address that as families and as educators and as leaders, creating wonderful apps to say, look, come to my table, right? Come to my lunch table. You don't have to worry about somebody ignoring, doing bad things to you over the internet.
And Evan, have you any experience in your friend group or extended friend group of anyone who's been bullied online? Have you seen that yet?
No, not yet, because I have a very close friend group, which is basically the girls who are like living in houses near to me, mum and dad obviously, and then one of my friends who I met over in London who is very good at coding as well, and she and I were doing the workshops at MozFest last year and the year before, and we've been very good friends ever since.
Very good. So for you, it's been positive so far. That's good.
Yeah, so far.
That's really important. I think one of the things you talked about, what it can become if people build up the pattern of bullying, right, and being, depersonalizing the other person. I think, it's interesting when we see what's happened, for example, in the US with the polarization, not just in politics, but it seems there's a polarization happening in so many aspects of people's lives. And, because you can depersonalize, do you think it gives people a greater license to take a very hard black and white polar position, and they can almost create their digital tribe around that position, and then the other, it's an us and them situation. It seems to me that's become worse in the last 10 years. What's your views living in the US?
Please don't talk about.
I'm not going to ask about politics. We're not going to do politics, or not with any names.
I'm living 24/7 politics in the US at the moment.
No. It's more that polarization, that black and white, two sides only. There can be no grey area.
I mean, you have that. I mean, everywhere. Not just in the US, and in gaming, you've got clans and teams, and you're creating that. But I don't. I haven't seen it as much as an issue, personally, out there. But I know it's an area of concern,
Because part of the reason I'm asking the question, I'd be interested in your perspective on this, Monique, is that when we think about the purpose of this conversation, it's really about the effect on the family and on our society. There's a role for all of us to play as parents and as people emerging into the kind of influential space. To kind of decide what kind of world we want to have, right? And it would seem to me that if we lose the ability to hear other perspectives that are different to ours, and perhaps be convinced of, from a strong position, that we're heading into a kind of a dark place. What are your thoughts? What can we do? What can we do to reverse that? I guess
my position on this is the stakes are very high. It's a fine line between a tool that can massively empower you, from medical diagnosis to education and so on. For example, I was on a panel with a former prime minister from Belgium who basically said, you're, to the politics, 24 hours with tweets and et cetera. You have a different use of it now with policy. To mass destruction. And the reason for that is as we democratize all of these tools, could that, and this is a hypothetical, could that spider in your shower be a spider, or could it be a mini drone with anthrax? That's the point I want to say, because now you have all of this, and when you have a child at age 4, with a tablet, I have to wonder, well, why are we doing that? So the stakes are very high here. And we are pulsating a lot of information about ourselves. I'm not suggesting for one moment that we have a dystopian world, but we have to be able to be cognizant of misuse. And so when you're pulsating all kinds of information about yourself, you're leaving a digital footprint for something out there to potentially profile you. And maybe you care, maybe you don't. It's around privacy, and it goes down to family levels, right? And so that's the kind of levels of responsibility we have to have. And I do believe that we want to, and I've always stated this, we want to be able to create the world we want to have, not the one we want to destroy, so, or avoid. And that's really, really very, very key. So, if you're pulsating information, if something is out there, you're leaving digital footprints, you have identities and misidentities, use of your identities, we have to be, are you in control of that? Or what does control look like? Is it too late? These are the questions we have to ask ourselves. And to the point of what could misuse look like? There's a great book called The Future of Violence, which is a really good book to look at, is what are the potential situations that we have to be cognizant of. And I think that that's really, really very, very key at this point in time, is to be able to, I don't suggest that you turn off completely and say, I'm off. The reality is we're on, but it's also responsible use.
So I think one of the things I was reminded of recently was the old story about the Orson Welles radio broadcast of the War of the Worlds. And we had people who were listening to that in the US at the time who believed that they were actually being invaded by it. And of course, any of us who would look at that story now, we would say, like, as a much more sophisticated audience, we would be able to recognize. I think part of what may be happening is that we're just going to have to develop another layer of sophistication. This is another method of being communicated to. And I believe with talent like this emerging, I'm optimistic about the fact that we as a society can do it.
Definitely.
But I think, to everyone who's here today, there's a positive role for us to play in creating the kind of environment and raising children and creating a family environment where people have that sense of self, have the ability to look at another person, have some empathy, hear a different perspective, and work to build consensus and a better world. I feel very positive, and I think if we use the technology correctly, we can actually share ideas. So I just want to, before we wrap up, I want to make sure we spend some time talking about that.
Oh yeah, no, I absolutely agree. You were talking about creating apps for people who are blind or who don't have eyesight or ears, who can't hear. Absolutely, these are the positive uses of our technology in our world. I'll give you an example. I was actually in New York. I was going to meet a colleague who was texting me constantly, and we were meeting at a coffee shop. I had no idea until he walked into the room that he was blind. But he was using, and he's a lawyer, so think about that, persistence, using technology in a way that is enabling him. And to go through Grand Central Station, to come to me in the middle of Manhattan, was very, very interesting. I was very impressed. And that's the kind of the types of usage I see is really, really positive. How about self-diagnosis? How about looking at it from a medicinal point of view?
Biomed.
I think that is hugely important. I mean, to be able to say, is that mole on my skin really something that I have to care about, and have that diagnosis done, because you can do it. Those are really positive examples.
Yeah, look, like yourself, Tim, I think that technology is 95% positive. It's enriching our lives. It's making us closer in communications. It's helping every aspect of our lives, our work lives, our personal lives, etc. An area that I've been involved in the last 7 years, and I think it's definitely kind of the next big thing, is innovation in food and agriculture. If you look at the world population today, it's going to grow from 7.1 to 10 billion people by 2050. Middle class today represents about 1.2 billion people, and that's going to grow to 4.5 billion people, led by countries like China and Brazil and India, etc. The agriculture industry is already under severe constraints and shortages. There's water shortage, droughts in the world, there's climate change. There's 50% less arable land in the world since 1961. Farmers have to produce 70% more in an already constrained environment. So that's probably one of the biggest and most important things that there's a challenge, because in every family, food is still very important. And technology, we've invested in about 35 companies that are improving, how farmers are able to monitor the crops, monitor the fields, manage water or scarce resource. There's a great company in Ireland called MooCall. It's a device and sensor that sits on a cow, and when the cow is calving, it's giving the contractions and telling the farmer to be out there and be ready and go, and it's saving a lot of issues in the field. On the supply chain, fresh food and bringing it to consumers, improving how fast it gets there, how fresh it gets there. And as much as we love all these devices, I'd love to be able to go into the store and kind of click on, the carrots or vegetables or potatoes, or how fresh are they? Can it tell me exactly where it came from? I miss the old days of butchers and being able to find where meat is coming from. I think technology is going to give us all that connectivity in a phenomenal world. And I think, there are other parts of the world, in Africa, that are under severe challenge in terms of water and agriculture. And I think technology can really help, there as well. So I'm a big technology fan, but we have to be careful. We have to take precautions, and I think we have to educate the key leaders, in our world, today.
Yeah. So, this is about families, and this is about, us as parents and children. It's about a parent. So just give us a minute on what you think, if you were going to give a message to the parents in the room as they would think about encouraging their children to become involved in technology or to use technology in a positive way. What do you think you might say to us?
Well, there are lots of stuff you can use, like to build robots, actually. Me and my brothers, we were using cardboard, masking tape, and recycled materials, which would be great for using all the recycling stuff. We were making something called rock, paper, scissors bot, which we used a microbit we programmed with rock, paper, scissors code for when you shake it, it'll pick rock, paper, or scissors. When you shake the robot or you move one of its arms, the arm that the microbit is on, it'll pick either rock, paper, or scissors, and you're able to do it against the robot. Basically, sometimes technology can be used with anything, and there are all these possibilities. You could create something that could end world poverty, that could end basically war. Basically, someday technology will help change and will improve the world to make everything better and equal for everyone.
Well, I think that's a pretty good way to close up. I think the last thing I'll say then before we wrap up is that for everyone in the room, I mean, this was a very learned panel, so I learned some things. But I think for all of us in the room, there's an opportunity for us to decide how we want to engage with technology and how we want it to show up in our families and in our communities. And that's really the message. Think about it, right? Yeah. Think about how you want it to be. And the technology it's a tool. We can use it to make the world the way we want it to be. And don't let the technology decide for us.
Absolutely.
Is that our message?
Yes.
Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Are you looking for life-changing entertainment? Does what you see on most channels leave you feeling unfulfilled? Well, look no further. Shalom World TV brings the peace and joy of Jesus Christ to you, whether at home or on the go. To start watching, you don't need antennas, cable connections, or a dish. You probably already have what you need if you have a smart TV, such as a Samsung, LG, or Panasonic, or if you have one with an Android, Opera, or Roku TV operating system. These can be found on the latest models of Sony, Toshiba, Vizio, Philips, RCA, Sharp Aquos, TCL, Insignia, Element, Hitachi, Vestel, Skyworth, Changhong, Konka, and Hisense. You can also watch Shalom TV on most IPTV streaming devices, starting with the 4th generation of Apple TV and Roku, Amazon Fire TV, Mi Box, Amino, Humax, or on TiVo Box through the Opera TV store. Are you a gamer or virtual reality enthusiast? We've got you covered. Shalom World is on Xbox One, Razer Forge, NVIDIA Shield, and HoloLens. To start watching, all you have to do is go to the App Store, download Shalom World, and start being fulfilled by content that brings you into a deeper relationship with Jesus Christ. For more information on how to watch Shalom World on your TVs and devices, visit us at shalomworld.org/connectedtv. Have a smartphone or tablet? Take Shalom with you wherever you go. Again, by downloading Shalom World from the App Store. If you prefer to watch from your Mac or PC, get the Shalom World desktop app. Or you can always watch from our website, shalomworld.org. And guess what? Shalom World is absolutely free on all of these platforms. Yes, free. There are no download charges and no in-store app purchases required, ever. If you're looking for life-changing entertainment, you found it. It's here, waiting for you on your Shalom World.